What's up, nerds, and welcome back. So 2 weeks ago, I did a review for the book Carnage Forever, which was basically to celebrate Carnage's 30th anniversary, but it also gave us a little bit of a taste of what Carnage is going to be up to, and it also teased us that Carnage would be getting another series coming forward, and that series has now come out. It came out, I think it was the week before last, and I didn't get around to it then, but I'm getting through to it now. If you don't like that, then fight me. But anyway, I'm going to talk today about Carnage number 1. So yes, as I mentioned, this is the beginning of a new Carnage series, and it's a little bit of an interesting take. I'm not really going to give it much of a lead up, other than that there is one thing that will be touched on that was introduced in Carnage Forever, which was the whole thing of him going and taking Hydra Man from jail for his own nefarious purposes, which we will find out a little bit more about in this particular book. But let's just kind of jump straight into it. So we're starting out in this scenario where there's this maelstrom, and like I said, we're already kind of seeing the whole thing that's going on with Hydra Man, as you're about to see in a second. But it says, you ever had one of those moments you're watching yourself rush headlong into disaster, like some out-of-body experience? You know this ends poorly, ruin lies past the edge, and yet you can't stop. Muscles and limbs move by memory, brain on auto, lungs inhaling fumes, heart pumping caustic into veins. So we can already see this close-up shot of Hydra Man, and then we also see Carnage, of course. And then we get this. This is going to be a detective who apparently will be a little bit important as we keep going along. But it says, you think to yourself, screw it. If I stop, I'll have to go back. And what the hell do I have to go back to? And then, plummeting through your personal cataclysm, you regret it. You watch yourself descend into ruin, knowing deep down that even if you make it through to the end, the only thing you'll have to show for it is all the carnage left behind. But this is kind of setting up, this is kind of like foreshadowing what's going to happen at some point. There's a whole lot going on here. It looks pretty weird. Like, he looks a little bit like Mr. Fantastic, but going through hell, basically. Or an MC Escher drawing, who really knows? That's kind of the setup here. And it says, I didn't see things turning out like this. Not at the beginning. And that's where we go back to the beginning. And it says, at the beginning, I thought I'd get my man. And that's who we're being introduced to. Detective Jonathan Shade is the guy's name. So he's pulling up to this crime scene, and there's another guy coming, I guess like another detective coming out saying, well, if it isn't John always gets his man Shade. I thought something smelled funny around here. So he's just telling him, must be your charming personality, Booth. And that's when we see, a uniformed cop telling them, hey, detectives, you two going to keep dancing out here? Because I'd love to get my nose as far away from this place as possible. And yeah, you can see everybody's kind of reacting to how badly it smells here. So that's the first thing he says when he's walking in. He's like, yeah, it's pretty ripe in here. And then he's like kind of asking, the cop, what's the lowdown? What's the information we have? So he's telling them it was an anonymous caller left a tip a little before 6:30. Says there's an awful smell coming from the old abandoned fur factory on Del Rio. Officers arrived on site 12 minutes later. After they hurled, they called in homicide, who called in special cases, and here we are. So Shade just immediately takes one look at it, and he immediately knows he has some experience with this particular killer. And he even says it. He says, it's him, Booth. He's back. The artist. And Booth asks him, like, well, how are you so sure? Which, looking at this, it does look pretty artistic, doesn't it? Gruesome, yes, but artistic nonetheless. Anyway, he says it fits. Any good copycat would have gotten the canvas right, but the staging is meticulous, set up for a show, framed so we have a dramatic view walking in. Then there's the added touch of the fur coat in a fur factory. It all fits. This is our guy. He's telling him, yeah, but the canvas is blank shade and no fluids on scene and no, he's just like twirling his finger around and shit. He says this is a deviation from his MO, isn't it? He says because he's not done. And then we get a close-up on the stomach as you can see some like squirming around going on inside. And that's when Shade tells him, like, look at the stomach. It's not a deviation, it's an escalation. So he tells all of the like crime scene guys, like, yo, get out from under there, because he knows what's about to happen. And what happens is the damn shit pops. And then out of it, obviously, the first thing that comes out is a whole bunch of blood that splatters onto this like pan or whatever the hell this thing is beneath him. And the cop is even saying, like, what the hell? As we see this, I'm assuming it's just a butterfly. I don't think this is a moth. just a butterfly fly out, and then a whole shit ton of butterflies fly out. So that was the that was the little flair that he added onto this. So I guess, nice touch, nice touch. Golf clap for you, sir. Anyway, he says, Booth is saying, "Oh dear God, what in the hell would drive a man to do this?" So they're all kind of, very much taken by surprise, as I think anybody would be. You see a gruesome crime scene like this. The last thing you expect is a beautiful array of butterflies to come flying out of it. But like I said, nice touch. So he says it's the performance, the theater of it all. He's an exhibitionist showing off. And that's where we can see blood kind of like starting to gather on the little tray. And you can sort of see a little bit of a spiral starting to form in there. But anyway, Shade is saying, but he didn't call the press, left an anonymous tip, no letters, no coded messages. So Booth is saying he's not doing it for us or for the public attention. He's like, no. So then who, John? Who is he calling to? And this is where you see the actual spiral starting to form. So that's very obvious that he's trying to call out to Carnage, because if you've been following along with Carnage, pretty recently, he has that whole like spiral thing. That's his symbol. So now we go over to this, old ass like Victorian style house, which I won't lie, I actually do love it. I've loved houses like this ever since I was a young lad watching Charmed. I say what you will about me for watching that show. I'm sure I have some people who watch my videos that are also fans of that show. And that house they lived in, you have no idea how long I've wanted a house just like that. Anyway, he's talking to his latest victim, this guy. He says, "Did you know Mr. Speakman? Did you know what my father said about his profession?" And this is where we get a close up on his license. Now, just in case you weren't sure that this is a made up character, they made sure to really sell it by listing his address as 123 Street Address, Your City, Washington. And he's 5'8". That's pretty damn short, but, well, manlet troubles aside. He goes on talking to him, saying for over 40 years that his dad was basically a mortician, and he was a good one. He spent his days making the dead more beautiful than they had ever been in life. He worked for the city too, so he got all the worst cases: prison beatings, murders, horrible accidents, victims abandoned and alone. When I was just a boy, he'd take me to work with him. I'd watch him the whole day, cleaning, stitching, sewing up bullet holes, and patching up ripped faces. And I'd ask him, "Daddy, why do you spend so much time making the dead look so beautiful? Why would they care? They're dead." And then, of course, the dude tries to say something witty, I'm imagining, but his mouth is taped shut, so we don't really get his answer. Anyway, he says, now you'd think he'd say he was doing it for the families or because he felt some sense of duty toward the dead. But no. You know what he said to me as he starts cutting into this dude? So, of course, he starts, screaming, but again, mouth muffled. He says that his dad told him, "Kenny, my dear boy, all things must be beautiful in the kingdom of God." And then as he's starting to be covered in blood, he says he died of leprosy when he was 63. You ever seen what leprosy does to a person? Yes, I listened to Death. I know exactly what leprosy does. And in case you've never heard that album, go listen to it. It's a badass album. He says his God chose to end him that way. And yet I am driven by his belief, Mr. Speakman. All things must be beautiful in the kingdom of God. You see, in life you are an unremarkable man, ordinary, perhaps even ugly. But I have let out your blood now, and in death, Mr. Speakman, in glorious and transformative death, I will make you beautiful. So he kind of like leans down and starts talking directly into his ear and says, "But I don't do this for your God or my father's. What do they know of beauty?" And then he kisses him on the temple, which, gross? I don't really know any other way to describe what's going on here other than gross. But he says, "I've been calling to him, you see. Ever since I saw the dragons in the sky, I knew they were gods, and I saw the mark of my God upon his head. On the right days, at the right times, I have taken life in his name, scrawled his spirals in blood. Do you hear me, I have asked? Do you see me, my God?" And we get this like close up on the winder as all of a sudden something comes crashing in, and there it is. There's Carnage, and you can see like, the spirals drawn on the wall, and then of course there's the one that's on his forehead. But anyway, he calls out to this guy's name is Kenneth. He tells him, "You've been a busy, busy boy, Kenneth. Such fervor with which you mutilate life, such bloody gusto and joy and terrible beauty. And then you scrawl that damned spiral all over it. Every single time. Are you calling my name, Kenneth? Did your mother never tell you stories about calling terrible things by their name? Or are you a fan? I think it's safe to say he's at least a fan. I would go so far as to take it a couple, notches higher than that. But I think we can say fan is a fairly safe term to use to describe him. But we go back over to John Shade, who's now pulling up at the hospital, and he's talking to Booth again, saying, what's the deal? Why am I down here at this hour? So he basically tells him that the guy that we saw before, Mr. Speakman, he managed to get away, and that the cops or the paramedics found him on the corner of Belvedere, almost bled out. They stabilized him, got him blood. He's still in a bad way. Some of the stuff he was saying, EMTs think he escaped a killer, an attack of some kind. Said his attacker was going to make him beautiful in death. Figured he'd want to be here when he wakes up. So he is, waking up, and he starts kind of giving them what information he can, telling them he doesn't really remember much, and that he was told that he lost a lot of blood. But anyway, he says he used one of the scalpels to cut himself free, but, basically Kenneth was already gone. Booth has asked him, is there anything you can think of that he said? Anything he wore or did that might help? But he says he was talking about his father, said he died of leprosy. That's pretty rare, right? So, of course, he takes a note of that and says, that's very good, it's very useful. And he asks, what else did he say? He says, I can't remember. He was talking to someone else. And that's when Shade's ears kind of perk up and he asks him there was someone else there. And that's when he kind of says something that would make most people believe, okay, we don't really need to write this part down. He's probably just hallucinating, or, he was at that point a little bit too traumatized to really be aware of what was going on, because he says the devil was there, detective, in the flesh. And he kept asking the devil to take him. That's where we kind of get like the flashback to it, as, Kenneth is there saying, I have followed you and your work for so very long, but there were rumors that Cletus Cassidy is gone. It's just you now, by yourself. So he says just, and Carnage finishes it by saying his name, Carnage. He's saying that he's hoping he could be his next host. Carnage tells him, curious, such a curious little deviant you are. But Cletus was special, and without him, things have changed. I've changed. Perhaps I could just stick a sharpened finger deep into your ear and wriggle it around a little, turn your brain into mush and leave you to rot in your own filth. Then again, and that's where he's just kind of like starting to beg, he's like, please. And he says, I have a long journey ahead of me, and I've missed Cletus's chattering. You've gone to such lengths to follow me around and show me your work. It would be rude not to show you mine. So this is where I was talking about, we see what happens to Hydro Man. But anyway, Kenneth is, thanking him for bringing me here. He's saying that it's glorious and beautiful.
Said so many things. Like,
you're perfect, you're beautiful, you look like Linda Evangelista, you're a model. Everything about you is perfect. Did you stone those tights? Oh, you're smiling.
And this is where we see Hydro Man just kind of like trussed up and being sort of torn apart. I guess that's sort of the best way to describe it. But Carnage is telling him it's beautiful, and he starts laughing. He says, I have never heard it described that way. But there is, I suppose, some truth in that. What do you think, Hydro Man? Do you feel beautiful? That's when he starts using his tendrils to like go into his eyes and shit, saying, no, I imagine you don't. But there is a beauty locked within you, Morris Bench. All I have to do is reach in, all the way down into the essence of what you are, into the molecules and atoms that make you up. Water, an infinite medium whose true power you haven't even begun to comprehend. As he's doing that, that causes Hydro Man to start, yelling out in pain, and then he starts screaming bloody murder as he's basically the one kind of like creating this portal. Carnage is telling him, it has made you what you are, and now I take it for my own. You see, Kenneth, I am no longer bound by the trappings and yearnings of Cletus Cassidy, or any man. All that torture and pain and flesh and blood, I admit I enjoyed it, but that was Cletus's preoccupation. We each have our own obsessions. I am yours. So this is where we go back over to Detective Shade, who is drawing the spiral formation, as Carnage finishes by saying, and you are probably someone else's. So Shade's calling Booth, telling him, we have a name, Neely, Kenneth Neely, only son of a mortician who died of leprosy back in 2012. I've been looking at prior rental records, and he's traveled all around the place. There are probably bodies we don't even know about, but it's almost like he's following someone else. And there's always a pattern, Booth. I'm going to take a look around the industrial sector, check on some hunches, so we can see, where he's been mapping out, like, the murders and shit, and he's made, again, the spiral formation, so he's getting closer to it. But Carnage tells Kenneth, but I want to escape these meager ambitions, Kenneth. I'm going to find my own meanings, my own beauty, and this is just the first step. So now the sky starts to glow red as he keeps doing whatever it is he's doing. And Shade pulls up, seeing all of this. So Carnage is asking Kenneth, tell me, why would I weigh myself down by bonding to another host? So I don't know for sure that he's going to end up bonding to Kenneth. If anything, I'm getting more of the feeling that he might end up bonding to Shade. That kind of seems to be where this foreshadowing is going, but we'll probably have to wait and find out and see exactly how that goes off the rails, but we'll see. Anyway, there is another story here. Well, actually, there's another story, and then there are some actual, like, sort of newspaper strip type comics, kind of like what we saw in Carnage Forever. This story starts out in Brooklyn, just short of midnight years ago. And it's kind of giving us the setting description saying this is the burned out rubble that was once a St. Estes home for boys. And that's where we can see this little kid kind of sitting in front of, a fire that he managed to make here. As Carnage's voice comes from off panel saying, Jeebus, a squatter? Didn't you read the sign? Trespassers will be shredded into people jerky, as he kind of like comes across him. And we can see here, if you will pay attention to the fire, this is a very, comic book drawn fire, but then we have the added effect of all of this, all of these sparks and shit shooting up into the sky. I get it. I get why they're doing this. They kind of went overboard with this. You don't need this damn much, but we're about to see where it becomes even weirder on the next page. Because the kid is telling him, it's you, it's really you. So Carnage is saying, well, that's a weird choice for last words, kids, but hey, it's your funeral. But anyway, he tells him, you were a legend in Juvenile Hall, man. I mean, a freaking icon, a god. That kind of gets, Cletus's attention as he says, God? Okay, that buys you 30 seconds. Talk. And this is where I was talking about. If you look at the fire here, it's clearly in front of the boy, but all these sparks and embers are also flying up behind him. So like I was saying, you could have just eliminated everything, all the like embers that are around him, and even the ones that are on like Carnage's leg around there, and just put some right above the fire, and that's about it. But anyway, I might be nitpicking a bit here, but I think that it's important sometimes to do so. And Kid says, everyone raved on how rad you were, how you didn't do rules because they were just lies to keep the sheep in line, and I saw how right you were. The library in Juvie kind of sucked, but an old newspaper article said you started out here, so when I escaped, I figured this might be where you'd hang. So he's just like, all right, and? So he tells him, I kind of need you to do something for me. I want you to kill someone. And he says someone, but he kind of means a few people. He kind of gives us the rundown on what it is. He's saying, hear me out. We're not that different, My parents didn't want me either. Didn't even report it when I ran away. Wasn't long before I landed in Juvie. And he says, but that was even worse. I wasn't big, wasn't strong, so I was an easy target for a gang called the Midnight Boys. Very original name. So he says, spent 3 weeks in the infirmary when they crushed my hand in a laundry press, and yeah, when you end up in a place like this, shit like that is going to happen. And he says, suffered jeers and misery when they stripped me naked and threw me into the exercise yard. Once a week. Well, there's something to be said about, having a set schedule, something you can actually look forward to. It helps build character. I don't really know that this is what they meant, but it's still, I think if he were to put a positive spin on it, he could still reap the benefits. So he says that they did it just for giggles and all that shit. And then he says, I was in for petty theft, vagrancy, nothing violent. I don't know how to kill. But you, some Carnage or Cletus stuff, some saying, whoa there, short stuff. What do you think I am, a hired hand? So he starts telling him, I'm on a mission, going to show the world that order is bull scraps, that the only thing real is chaos. I do what I want to, kid, just because I can. And that's where he tells him, but that's the beauty of it. You kill good guys, right? And innocent bystanders? So what if you killed a bunch of bad guys instead? Like juvie inmates, future hard timers. That'd be totally unexpected. And isn't that what chaos is? This does manage to work on the psychopathic serial killer, as he says, kid, I'm beginning to like your style. He goes with him back to the Midtown Juvenile Detention Facility in the morning, and that's where he's kind of pointing out who the guys are to him. He says, that's them, the Midnight Boys, the ones with the moon and dagger tattoos. Guy with the mohawks, the leader. So he says, must be transferred to an adult facility. Cletus just says, dead here, dead there, doesn't matter. So he kind of like puts the mask back on and says it's time to get this party started. He kills the cops, or I guess the COs first, and then he says, the entertainment has arrived as he drops down in front of them. And then he starts telling the gang or whatever, cool tats, guys, brothers forever and all that. It's what I love about you gang folk. You're like family, always sticking, and he literally sticks them together by splatching them together and then throws them, and he says, they stick together. So this is where the kid sees this crumpled heap of these two fall right in front of him, and already he's kind of looking a little bit, unprepared for what's about to happen. So one of the CEOs comes up and tries to pepper spray Carnage, to which he says, "Really? Pepper spray?" And then he kind of like licks it up, saying, "Could use a little salt. But since you're so fond of the hot stuff," and he just kind of like backhands him into the little bus and shit. He says, "Try a dose of this," and then he makes the bus blow up, which of course burns the dude alive because he wasn't really dead. So now he burns alive in the wreckage of the bus. The other gang members try to run away. He says, "Nice, you must be the brains of the bunch. Got sense enough to run. But climbing that fence is going to take forever, smarty pants. Much quicker if you just go through it." And he literally pushes him through the fence. So we don't actually see the result of that, because when we see the fence in the next panel, it's completely clean, which is a little bit disappointing. But anyway, they hear sirens coming, so Carnage is like, "Uh-oh, sirens. I hate when those badge thumping busybodies butt in." And then he gives a spike to the kid saying, "Here you go. You can take out the head honcho, my treat." And he's just kind of standing there looking at it. So he's like, "Well, come on, slowpoke. That spear is going to drop to dust in a few seconds. Do him." But the kid just kind of looks at him, and then he looks at all of the like destruction and, well, for lack of a better term, carnage. And then just drops the damn spear, and he's like, "No." And then that's where Carnage freaks out. He's like, "What? No? As in, no? You gotta be kidding." So the kid explains to him, "I was miserable in juvie, almost suicidal. Dreamed every day of being a tough guy myself, but I never thought about what comes after. Those guards had wives, those inmates had mothers. Their misery's gonna be forever. What you do is wrong, Carnage. You're wrong. But I did learn something from you. I'm saying no, because I can." That's where we kind of see, he kind of squares up to him a little bit, but it says, "The monster in red feels rage, readies his attack, then hesitates, because his would-be accomplice shows weakness, remorse? Or is it something deeper, unforeseen, something heretofore denied, as if the student, even for the brief tick of a heartbeat, has become the teacher? Whatever the cause, the effect, at least for this moment, is puzzling to them both." So Carnage just says, "Fuck it, I'm going to take off then," and he just swings away, leaves the kid there. And that's where that particular story ends. So, like I said, the last thing that's in here is this sort of like Peanuts. Well, the first one is like a Peanuts type of story, and then the second one is more The Wizard of Id. But I'll just go through them real quick. We see, Carnage is coming out kind of looking like Snoopy, and he goes and sits on top of the house, and so he's talking about, here's the Latverian pilot strafing civilians trying to escape a recent bombing. And so he's imagining all the sounds of like aerial combat. And then he says, "Here's the pilot in a quaint local tavern ready to kill all the patrons inside." And then it appears he does exactly that. So then he goes back to his little house, says, "Here's the brave pilot heading back to his stolen Quinjet for more strafing," and then more aerial combat. And then he says, "I have a limited range of interests." Cute. And then the last one is the Watcher of If. So it's, Uatu the Watcher, and he's selling, this venom. He's saying, "I'm an ancient and silent witness to the multiverse," to which Venom's just like, "So what?" He says, "It is my sworn task to chronicle what happens across 100,000 possible worlds and ask the question, what if?" And he's just like, "Big deal." So he says, "Today we examine the curious scenario. What if Cletus Cassidy was a Canadian citizen?" So we see this one, panel where he's just like apologizing after having killed people. He's like, "Sorry, so sorry, my bad." And that's where we go back to them, and Venom's just saying, "That was awful." And he says, "Next, what if Venom was kind of mouthy?" And he just says, "The Watcher is a fink." That's the end of that. And yeah, that kind of seems to be the format they're kind of going with the Carnage comics right now. We get the actual like mainline story, and then there's a little like backup story, and then there's just these cute little like, cartoons, like I said, newspaper comics. So interesting format for them to go with this particular thing, but well, I mean, that's what we have. So I don't really know what all to make of the story itself just yet. I think there was more carnage and destruction in the backup story with the kid, quite honestly. At least from Carnage, there was killing done by that guy Kenneth, but there wasn't very much going on with Carnage himself. So we'll see if that actually picks up in the next issue, possibly. I don't know. I think it was told well enough for me to go back and pick up the next one, possibly pick up like the first arc of this particular series and see what it develops into, if it's worth it to keep going. But at least for now, it has my attention just enough to come back for the next one. So I guess in that way it was somewhat of a win. But I don't know. I don't really have much else to say about it. Like I said, the art in there was actually pretty good. I'm not gonna complain about that. It was serviceable to the story. I've definitely seen worse art in a comic book, but yeah, I think overall it was effective in what it was trying to do. It set up this brand new story, kind of like almost like a Dexter, but not really, in that he's not a good guy. Just like a murder mystery dealing with serial killers, which is, very much Carnage's speed. So I think we have all of that together, and it could possibly end up developing into something that works, but it could also very quickly go off the rails, as we've seen multiple times with stories like this. So we'll have to see which way this is going to go. But that's going to do it for my review on this particular book. I don't know if anybody out there has picked it up. You've had plenty of time. I know I did. It took me a while to get around to actually making this review, but I'm like I said, I'm here now. I made the review, so leave me alone. Anyway, if you're done here and you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like the video, you're subscribed, and you hit the notification bell, all that fun stuff. And if you'd like to share the video, go ahead and do that. I appreciate you so very much for doing so. But if you're done here, go and read a book. And if not, then I'll see you on my next video.